Here's a question for you. You've already given over your sovereignty to an unelected group of globalists who reside in Brussels, Belgium. How would you like for these unelected globalists now to start their own spy network to spy on Russia, China, and of course, European citizens? Would you guys be down with that? Well, that's exactly what's meant to happen, because according to a new report, the witch herself, Ursula Von Der Leyen, the European Commissioner, is creating a new intelligence agency, in a spy agency inside of the EU bureaucracy. This is basically a proto-CIA for Europe. They say it's to spy on Russia, but of course, just like our CIA and our NSA, it will be used to spy on Europeans first and foremost. Dr. Olga Ravasi is the host of the National Conversation. She joins us now to talk about the craziness in Europe. Great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for hanging with us. We got a lot of breaking news today with regards to Epstein and everything else. So thank you for that. So what do you make of this? What do you make of this report that the EU is going to set up a new intelligence unit under Ursula von der Leyen, specifically under this unelected group of globalists? So the Portuguese people, the Italian people, the German people have no authority over it, basically.
Well, that is exactly what's happening in Europe. Europeans have turned their sovereignty over to the unelected bureaucrats. And usually those unelected bureaucrats are, in fact, failed politicians in each one of those respective countries, where they're all of a sudden elevated into these positions of power where nobody ever voted for them, but somehow they have free reign. And they can go around dictating to everyone what to do and how to live their lives. And furthermore, create weaponized agencies that, of course, are allegedly meant to function externally, but in fact, they will be weaponized and turn internally and spy on their own people. That is the case all over Europe. That is the case. Unfortunately, it happened here. We are experiencing some of that. We started experiencing it a long time ago, but we kind of noticed in 2015, 2016, with the arrival of President Trump, how those agencies get weaponized, how they steal elections, how the CIA, and I can mention several others, even BND and MI6, and all of them operate unconstitutionally on their own terrain and on their own turf. So that is the case with the Europeans. And, you know, while the European people, and you guys, I understand, came back from Europe, so you know firsthand, and I have experienced this consistently, we can recognize that blueprint of what it means to not only weaponize agencies, to turn them against their own people, but then to steal elections, to spy on everybody, to censor everybody, to police the internet, to police social media. Look at what's going on in the UK. Granted, they're not part of the European Union, but the same set of internationalists or the cosmopolitans, and the poster child for that being Keir Starmer, they can basically prosecute you for just posting on X or posting on Facebook. And if you dare criticize them, you can be imprisoned. If you dare fly your own flag somehow, your own national flag, and turning inward and wanting to show your national pride, well, to this group of unelected bureaucrats and the cosmopolitans and the internationalists, that is the stuff that the peasants do. That is not the things that the elite do. And so this group of people that I'm mentioning, and, I'm painting a picture here of France, I'm painting a picture here of Germany, starting with Angela Merkel to today, all of them are doing the same exact thing. And that is fragmenting their own populations with uncontrolled, but actually controlled demographic replacement and immigration. And then further turning against their own people under the guise of, well, we're going to keep an eye on Russia, we're going to keep an eye on China, we're going to keep an eye on the so-called adversaries. But interestingly enough, you don't notice any of that happening, for example, in Hungary. You don't see it in Slovakia. We just got recently good news out of Czech Republic because they elected Babuš, who is also conservative. So you don't see that in that kind of like former Eastern Bloc, let's say, of countries who are really strongly opposing the European Union bureaucrats, who are opposing immigration, who are opposing sending money consistently to Ukraine and shooting themselves essentially in the foot, which all of the Western nations have done it. So again, this is what's happening all across the West. And Ursula von der Leyen and all of her, colleagues and bureaucrats, as I said, have failed consistently, and yet they keep being empowered, not only in the Brussels, but I mean, you look at NATO, you look at the International Court Tribunal at The Hague. I mean, Europe is rampant, and it's a cesspool of all of these international organizations that somehow are superior in the eyes of these elected bureaucrats to the national institutions of their own countries. So again, I want to go back to Starmer, for example, and that just really painted a picture of him to me. He was asked, what do you prefer, Davos or Westminster? And he didn't hesitate to tell us he prefers Davos. And what does that tell you? Ursula is just yet another example of this. So while they're fragmenting their own countries and sowing discord, and they are all on the verge of civil war, they somehow find their moral superiority by creating international organizations or being indebted to the international organizations. Because again, as I said, the national stuff, the internal stuff is for the street, for the mob, and for the peasants, but not for the elites.
Now, when we lived in Europe, the Digital Services Act passed, and they sold it to us as a way to stop the mob and dirty money and terrorists and, of course, all the bad guys, right? But we knew that it was giving them the power to read our WhatsApp, which everyone in Europe uses WhatsApp to communicate.
Or Viber.
Yes. And so now the Europeans have allowed this to happen. There was very little fight, unfortunately, because it was so, well sold. And the European economy was so hard that people don't have the time to fight back, to pay attention. And what they're saying now is, and so they have this data, is the point I'm trying to make. They've been collecting it since they passed this act, probably before illegally. Now they're saying we need a formal department to take care of it, which tells me they've had all this data. They need to go through it. They need someone in charge. And so, while the Americans are saying we want to abolish the CIA, they do us wrong, the Europeans are like, let's do that. Now, what makes me so sad is that the Portuguese overthrew the secret police in the 70s because they did not want to live like this. How are the European citizens missing that it's happening again? What do you think?
But that's exactly what you pointed out. It's the strife that they are going through: economics, education, demographic replacement. I mean, people are worrying in Europe how to pay their rents, their mortgages, how to send their children to school, and hoping that, their child is not going to be groomed and raped by the mass gangs of foreigners. They're hoping that they're going to be able to afford gas. They're hoping that they're going to be able to afford food, because, as we mentioned, the Europeans have economically shot themselves in the foot by funding all of these foreign wars. So that is why I don't think it's the lack of interest to pay attention. It's the inability to act, because they're consumed by their own mere survival, while, again, the unelected bureaucrats can basically run rampant. And that is also the point where it's hard to fight when you have this two-tier system where, yes, you have some elected people that you think, okay, we're going to vote them out. But what about the unelected people? Nobody is voting for them, and they can still consistently pursue these policies. So, as we said in the beginning, the sovereignty doesn't really lay within the people, but it doesn't even lay within those who they elect and who they vote for. So when you fulfill the conditions of the political system cannot self-adjust, or you don't have the means to adjust it by voting, by participating in it, because nobody really wants to vote anymore, because they don't believe in voting, because nothing changes. You can kind of like what we're experiencing here. It seems like we're voting, and no matter how you vote, you kind of like get John McCain, Well, that's sort of what's happening in Europe.
Yeah.
No matter how you vote, you sort of get the unelected bureaucrats with Ursula and, the rest of them. I mean, you guys report on the Balkans, for example. Well, that's consistently what happens in the Balkans. They, they vote, but then they have these unelected bureaucrats who kind of like come in and tell everybody what they need to do. And they feel superior and they feel that their, moral superiority is over the people who are worrying about their life. So you end up fulfilling the conditions that now leads you to civil strife, and civil strife leads to civil war. So, whether it's Ursula or back to Keir Starmer, he kind of reminds me of King Charles I. He was violently overthrown and executed, and we ended up with Cromwell and the Republic. So that's literally what every Western country in Europe is experiencing. And again, back to Natalie's point, not that the people are unaware, they're unable to function anymore through the political system, through what they thought were legitimate political and civic means, which is leading us to the scary part.
Gosh,
it can potentially turn into civil war. And I will argue that we are living through it somewhat, but it hasn't completely turned violent. And when you look at how these societies are fragmented or balkanized with, the uncontrolled demographic replacement, with the natives versus the foreigners, even those foreigners who were born in those respective countries, but they never fundamentally integrated, you have perfect conditions for civil war because there is no adjustment anymore that is legitimate politically. And if there is no adjustment politically, you know what that leads to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're seeing the destruction of Germany. You're seeing the
absolutely
destruction of the nuclear power
and again,
plant.
a lot of this is economic. You look at their foreign policy, and I think even for us Americans looking at our foreign policy, this happens to leaders, this happens to countries who all of a sudden become enamored by solving international problems, who again, to them seem far superior because, at these international institutions, you solve more important problems, where when you turn inward, you actually want to focus on your own people. But they are solving international problems to the detriment of their native populations. And unfortunately, that is also happening here to us in the United States. And, even President Trump's base is kind of becoming disenfranchised and unhappy because we want our internal problems solved. We don't want to be focused outward. But I think now we are waking up to the fact that focusing on international and foreign policy actually costs you here domestically. It costs you at the pump. It costs you in the grocery store. And as Natalie said, it costs you, your mere survival is at stake. They can spy on you and they can barrage you any way they want and destroy your livelihood, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, and these people, sadly, and economically, they're being crushed, so they go along with it. Digital ID. Okay, you're going to give me a government stipend of euros because I'm broke right now. So if you want to control people, you beat them down, and that's exactly what's happening.
That's exactly it. And they are completely beaten down, so they cannot even focus on some of these larger problems because they're focused on survival. And that is the sad part, because once the economic collapse happens, and I feel that inevitably it will happen, not just in Europe, but here, unfortunately, as well. That is, with all of these preconditions that I outlined, that is the moment when you can expect violence. And unfortunately, it's going to be bloody because, look, the globalists, the internationalists, they know, and look, this is not, it's all by design. It's not the glitch of the system. It's a feature of the system. So basically, once they fragmented enough where there is no societal cohesion, where there's no high trust society, where you can naturally come to a consensus, once you break it down completely, it leads to civil war, and it becomes bloody because you're attacking the weakest link in the chain. For example, when you look at the Balkans, they attack the religious, the ethnic. In the United States, you're kind of looking at racial. So anything that is weak within a society is being exploited. And for the Europeans, that is actually this demographic replacement where now all of a sudden the native populations are feeling like minorities in their own homes. They are being spied on, they are being beaten down, to Clayton's point, and they can barely survive. So what is left for them to do? How do you battle this out?
Yeah.
Gosh, you're great. Great to have you here on the. I can't believe we haven't had you on the show yet. Well, you're going to be back. We'll just have a regular.
Thank you.
We'll have a regular
Please.
time.
I'm so glad to talk to you
Don't tell
guys.
her. We'll ask her nicely.
I'll tell her you're coming back. You're coming back.
If you will.
Would love
please.
to. Would be.
Surrounded by strong
Will do.
women.
Okay.
I'm going to be so strong
Thank you.
myself. You're coming back. All right. Great to see you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ravasi. Great to have you here on the show.
Thanks a lot.